You're listening to the Voice of Russia's Daily Debate. I'm Hywel Davies. It's an issue that the Prime Minister at least has no doubts about. He's written, if we don't back this technology, we will miss a massive opportunity to help families with their bills and make our country more competitive. He's talking, of course, about fracking, an issue that seems to have divided much of the country, with protests in the Sussex village of Balcombe capturing the media spotlight for much of the last week. It's a process that sees a mix of water, sand and chemicals forced at high pressure down a long well. That fractures the rock, releasing gas underground, which is then collected. Opponents of the process say the method has a long list of drawbacks. It uses huge amounts of water, can pollute water supplies, damages the environment by releasing methane, and can cause earth tremors, they say. Those in favour of fracking argue it has led to the slashing of gas prices in the United States, with tens of thousands of jobs created, and the profitability of energy-hungry businesses transformed. So who's right in this increasingly polarised debate? Or do both sides contain elements of the truth? Here to hopefully help me answer these questions are Corin Taylor, Senior Economic Advisor at the Institute of Directors and the co-author of a recent report on fracking. Alastair Harper, Senior Policy Advisor at Green Alliance, which has campaigned against the process. And down the line from Balcombe, we have Charles Metcalfe, a resident of the village who's also opposed to fracking. Corin, your report says there are lots of jobs could be created by this and the process could provide cheap, abundant gas.
Yeah, I think there are a number of both economic and environmental benefits from the production of shale gas here in the UK. I mean, the case for shale oil is slightly different, but for shale gas, we're now importing about half of our gas, and of course we need gas for heating, as well as electricity generation, backing up renewables and so on. And that import dependency is set to go up to 3/4, so what domestic gas can do is start to replace some of those imports. It can also create a lot of jobs, a lot of them in parts of the country that need them most, and of course it's a new source of tax revenue. And finally, some of the big industrial users who have benefited from North Sea gas, both as a source of energy and also for petrochemical feedstocks, they also would benefit a lot from shale gas here in the UK. But it's not just about the economy as well. I think there are some wider environmental benefits too. So if you do the process and it's well regulated, there'll be lower emissions than imported liquefied natural gas. The Committee on Climate Change has said that. Also, you need gas, as I said, to back up renewables, to provide power when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And finally, there is an opportunity, as they're starting to develop in the US, of putting natural gas in road transport, which not only reduces CO2 a little, but also reduces air pollutants and can help us to clean up city air.
Alastair, there are environmental arguments in favour of fracking as well, apparently.
Only if they're done alongside huge investment in low-carbon energy and technology, into renewables, into energy efficiency, and that gas does become that backup. And I think the risk is that it becomes not the second act, the wingman, but commander of our energy in the future. And I think the most striking thing about where this debate has gone on fracking in the UK and how polarised it is, I think the blame can be put at the door of the Prime Minister. The quotes you read out at the start are extraordinary from the Prime Minister. To say to the public, as if this technology is here now, it's going to affect your bills now, it's going to enrich you now, when in fact we're a decade off at the earliest. This is experimentation, this is exploration.
But to put the point across, the United States has been doing this for, a decade now, and it has seen gas prices slashed, down to a fifth of what they were last year.
And also, I'd be open to say that it has helped reduce emissions in the United States. That's because they were very much a coal-based energy grid in the UK. We are trying...
Sorry, in the United States, you mean?
Yes, sorry, in the United States. We are trying to move away from that. We have carbon budgets to reduce coal use in the UK. We have trajectories from the Committee on Climate Change and supported by the Department of Energy and Climate Change to ramp up our renewable energy in the UK. If we do that, there isn't a big gap left for gas. There is, I agree with Corin, a small place for it to play as a backup, but it's not the headline act. And what's been risked this summer is the Prime Minister seems to think it should be.
Charles, you're at the centre of this debate, living in Balcombe. What are your worries about fracking?
I have a lot of worries about fracking because of the health problems, the pollution problems it's caused both in the United States, in Australia, in Poland, almost everywhere where it's been tried. I'd just like to make one point about the statement that Cameron made at the very beginning of his piece in the Telegraph. You quoted it, "It will help families with their bills." Now, this is actually completely untrue. All the experts agree that the price of gas to the consumer will barely change at all. Cuadrilla, the company drilling half a mile from my house, says it won't make any significant difference to the price of gas. Ofgem, the regulator, says it won't make any significant difference to the price of gas. So the fact that the Prime Minister is actually saying it will help families with their bills is really, really misleading, because that's just not true. The market for gas is an international market. If we think that gas is going to come out of the UK subsoil and go straight into British homes, it's just wrong. Gas going to an international market. Corin mentioned the environmental benefits of having homegrown gas as opposed to liquefied natural gas brought in from other countries. I don't know which planet he's on, but I mean, that is the market for gas. We don't just get to keep our own gas. The Americans, the price of gas has fallen because they've got so much out of the ground. Almost all of that gas in the States is being shipped overseas because the fracking companies cannot make money on selling it in the States. But as far as the problems are concerned, they're very well documented. They're very weaselly denied by the oil and gas industry. But there are really, really dangerous worries about water contamination, about real problems, particularly with breathing diseases for communities that are very close to gas wells. And these have been seen in the States, in Australia, and I cannot understand why such a dangerous, unproven technology can be allowed to take root here in the UK, which at the moment, parts of it are still green and pleasant.
Corin, if you can come in, yes. I'm interested in the financial angle, the criticism there that it won't cut gas prices.
I think if you look at our report, what we've said is it's too early to tell what the impact on gas prices will be, but that the economic and environmental benefits I outlined before make enough of a case for it without any impact on price. Just the point about...
Why does the Prime Minister say that it's going to make prices cheaper for UK consumers? Very misleading.
I'm not the Prime Minister's spokesman, so I can't speak for him. There was a report, though, that was commissioned by DEC, which came out about a month ago, which said that if you see quite significant production in the UK and other European countries too, you could see wholesale gas prices fall by up to a quarter. Now, a lot of that depends on production in other countries in the UK as well, and I think that will probably be the major impact on price. On the point about it being a new untested technology, I mean, I really take issue with that. I mean, we've had about 2,000 onshore oil and gas wells drilled in the UK. About 200 of them have been fracked already, and Wyche Farm, which is the Western Europe's largest onshore oil field, also produces a lot of gas. That's located right slap bang in the middle of an area of outstanding natural beauty, sites of special scientific interest, and so on. It's been producing for about 30 years, and there haven't been any problems.
The actual process that they're trying to visit on us in Balcombe and all sorts of other communities, both in the southeast and up in Lancashire and in Scotland, is a process called horizontal slick water fracturing. And no one claims that that is an old process. And all these oil wells that have been drilled, and I wouldn't for a moment disagree with you, Corin, about that in the UK, they were not using this process. And that is the process that is really unproven. Estimates vary as to when it was first used. Some people say 1992, some people say 2002, but it is not a safe and tested technology. It causes problems wherever it's been used, and when Cuadrilla tried to claim to the people of Lancashire before they drilled and fracked up there that it was a safe and proven technology, they were censored by the Advertising Standards Authority and on 6 points, and one of the things they said was, this is not safe and proven.
You're listening to the Daily Debate on The Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davies, and today we're discussing fracking with Corin Taylor, Senior Economic Advisor at the Institute of Directors, Alastair Harper, Senior Policy Advisor at Green Alliance, and down the line we have Charles Metcalfe, a local resident at Balcombe. So, Alastair, I think you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to agree with Charles that the risk that we say this is going to be fine in your area, don't worry about it, and when the Prime Minister especially says that, really risks patronising the British public, and it really risks alienating the British public. And that's what we're seeing right now, is saying, you people wouldn't understand, this is for the greater good, this is for the economic good of the nation. But as Corin says, we don't know what the economic impact will be. It's a long way off until we will.
Sorry, there are economic impacts as well as price. I think those are quite clear, but sorry, just to clarify.
The one economic impact we're clear on is low carbon infrastructure in the UK, because that's currently planned, and it's planned up to 2020 in Treasury's infrastructure pipeline, and it's worth £180 billion. That alone would put up our GDP by 0.7%. rip it out, we'd drop 2.2% back into recession. We know that's there. That's what people wanting to invest in this country, that's what they're wanting to do. What the Prime Minister's saying, and what some of his allies in the Conservative Party, like Owen Paterson, with their rhetoric on this are saying, is that we don't want your money. Take it somewhere else. Take it to France, take it to Germany. We're going to have a punt on this thing. We don't know how it'll turn out, but fingers crossed.
Can we just ask you, Corin, about the potential environmental problems as well? People here are talking about the potential for pollution. In your report, you talked about that a little bit. Do you think those worries are overblown?
Yeah, I do. And actually, if you look at the Royal Society report that was published last year, I think that was quite clear that it needs to be strongly regulated, but this is a process that we can do properly in the UK. And there are a number of differences between how it's going to be regulated here in the UK as opposed to how it is in the US. So, for example, if you're trying to deal with flowback water and fracking fluid that comes back up to the surface, in the US, you're allowed to dispose of that in open ponds. They need to be sealed. But in the UK, you're going to have to put those in steel tanks with a proper sort of bathtub around to contain any spills. And then that water will need to get transported away and get treated just like any other industrial waste. So that's one thing. On the earth tremors, you've got real-time seismic monitoring. So any tremor above 0.5 will trigger a shutdown of the actual process. So, on a lot of areas like that, you've got very strong rules. And you've also got not just the Environment Agency, but also the Health and Safety Executive. So they've been monitoring the integrity of wells and construction of wells in the North Sea for a long time. They'll be making sure that wells are constructed properly on land as well.
So, Alastair, with strict regulation, perhaps we could make this much safer and sort of allay many of your worries.
What you can't get away from is the huge local impact of those trucks coming and the water being brought and taken away. What you can't get away from is it's a greenhouse gas. It might have some role to play if it shuts down the last coal plants in the UK. It might have some role to play if it displaces higher carbon stuff. But it will be absolutely disastrous if it displaces renewable energy in the UK.
But at the moment, we're importing coal from the United States, which is being dug up and releasing methane just as much, isn't it?
The use of coal in the UK is preposterous right now. We need to be focused on that. I don't disagree. But that doesn't mean that we replace a bad with a lesser bad. Why not just go for the good? Well,
surely that's a good idea to replace a bad with a lesser bad.
When you've got the good ready to go and ready planned for. We've planned 4 times as much investment in offshore wind as we have in gas right now. All of low carbon infrastructure is worth 4 times as much as high carbon infrastructure up to 2020. This is the status quo we have. I listened to the boss of GE the other week said, we've set up to invest in renewables in the UK. That was the plan. He told the business secretary, if you're changing that plan, let us know. We can change it. It'll delay investment in the UK by 10 years, but we'll just do what you set the agenda for.
I'd like to make the point that everyone says the UK regulations are going to be incredibly strong, but what is the government doing at the moment? What is it being obliged to do at the moment to try and solve the economic crisis we're in? It's laying off staff. Now, as far as I've been able to determine, these regulations are going to be self-regulated by the oil and gas industry. When they have a problem, they're to report it to the people who are overseeing them, whether it's the Health and Safety Executive or the Environment Agency, and then people will come down and have a look at it. Now, that's a bit like asking a fox who's got into a chicken coop to tell the farmer if he kills any hens. Cuadrilla, which is the company on the outskirts of Balcombe at the moment, they have fracked once in the UK at the moment. It was up in Lancashire at a place called Priest Hall, and during the process of that fracking, they deformed their well casing there. They continued to frack for another 2 months without telling anyone, and it wasn't until 6 months later that they informed the authorities. They kept stum for 6 months. Now, I'm sorry, but if you don't have regulators actually at the site, if you don't have companies who are prepared to admit when things have gone wrong, the regulations are no good.
Do we not have a larger problem, though, in that we have problems with how much power we're actually managing to create? We've had recent reports saying that the factories might have to close down in a few years' time because they're not producing enough power. So there is a need for gas to fill the gap before renewables can come on stream.
I think there is a need for gas. I'm not one of these complete fossil fuel deniers. Yes, of course we need it to bridge the gap before renewables and any other technologies come along. But, as Alastair said, we really mustn't lose sight of the fact that it's of paramount importance to continue research into different ways to keep our economy running, to keep our homes alight, to keep our gas ovens or whatever kind of ovens in a state to cook. That is supremely important because no one disputes the fact that fossil fuels are a limited resource and that one day they will run out. If we keep on sort of wrenching the last drops and bubbles of fossil fuels from the earth and forget about investing in tomorrow's technology, one day we're really going to be up against it.
Corin?
The key issue here is whether you see gas as part of the problem or part of the solution. I think that's really fundamental to this whole debate. And if you look at how UK got its energy from last year, total energy, including transport and heating, about 35% gas and 33% oil, just under 20% coal, 8% nuclear and less than 5% renewables. And of those renewables, some of those were biomass, of course, and some people have issues around using biomass as a source. That's not to say that we should sort of give up. There's a real imperative to massively grow that low carbon share, which is less than 15% of the total. So I'd say renewables and also nuclear as well. But we can't deny the fact that actually it's going to take time to do that. And in that interim, we are going to need to see gas remaining as an important energy source for us. And I agree, we need to be doing a lot of research on next generation nuclear and renewable technologies that can really do the real heavy lifting on low carbon. But for now, gas is going to be a really important part of our energy mix.
But how large do you see the sector becoming? I mean, let's nail it down. I mean, you're saying it's a temporary stopgap measure, but how large a temporary stopgap measure?
Well, I mean, we did some scenarios based on a potential production phase, obviously assuming that the exploration is successful. And we see production starting at the end of this decade and really peaking in the late 2020s.
But your assumption was that we did half as many wells as the United States.
We did scenarios that were based on a peak drilling of 400 laterals a year. Now, you can concentrate those on far fewer sites, so it wasn't about having 400 sites at all. And assuming that we get about the same amount of gas per lateral as you have in the US, and use about the same amount of water and so on. And of course, one of the things with shale wells is that once you stop drilling, the production declines quite quickly. So that if you do a lot of drilling and then you decide, actually, we've got something better that's come along, then actually you can kind of shut that down, and it's not that many years before production starts to tail off quite quickly.
But turning it on will be too late. The end of this decade is too late for the energy crunch that we're talking about. We've been planning across the political spectrum and with business, with environmentalists, with economists for the last decade about how we deal with this. There's been a lot of indecision, a lot of complacency. But the agreement that came about across the board was that we need a balanced mix that dealt with the three problems of security, supply and climate, and costs in there as well somewhere. And as a result, that's why we've got this huge investment coming in renewables. That's on the books, ready to go. It's small now because it hasn't happened yet. That's what change is. 10 years ago, it wasn't a dot of a percentage. Now it's racing ahead, the slice of the pie that's renewables in our
But the
energy
cost
mix.
of producing electricity via renewables is still very, very high.
That's why we have to put lots of money into research to find ways of making it lower. Come up with new technologies, new materials, new alloys perhaps, to drive wave turbines in the sea. We're an island. One thing that happens every day is the waves go in and out. There are great big currents there waiting to be exploited. At the moment, we don't have the right kind of metal to actually keep the turbines from rusting, I'm told. That's the kind of research we should be doing. That's a huge potential source of energy for us, which at the moment we were leading that some 50 years ago, and it's just sort of been let go fallow. There's one particular channel in the Orkneys where there are a few companies researching possibilities of actually harnessing this very strong current, but that's all. And it's good that there is someone trying to do that. But, renewables are always going to be a mix. And until we can get renewables on stream through this new investment, of course, fossil fuels are going to be part of the mix, and maybe even nuclear, although the latest happenings in Japan really make it clear how dangerous nuclear power stations can be if they're put in the wrong place.
You're listening to the Daily Debate on The Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davies, and today we're discussing fracking with Corin Taylor, Senior Economic Advisor at the Institute of Directors, Alastair Harper, Senior Policy Advisor at Green Alliance, and down the line we have Charles Metcalfe, a local resident at Balcombe. But Charles, isn't there an element here of you're accusing fracking of being untested technology, and then you're demanding sort of research into new technology for renewables?
Yes, because I'm saying that fracking is potentially very dangerous. It's dangerous in that it can pollute our clean water. It's dangerous in that it can pollute our clean air. And those are real problems. There was a wonderful report done by Schlumberger a few years back talking about the life of wells, saying wells fail. It may take 5 years, it may take 50 years. but eventually those will fail. And if they have noxious produced water, as the fracking industry calls it, water that has been contaminated by naturally occurring radioactive materials, by heavy metals that you find underground and that should be left underground, eventually at least half of those will find their way to the surface, will poison our aquifers, and will poison our atmosphere. And that is too great a risk to take. Okay, Corin says you can shut it off as soon as you want to. You can cap the wells, you can turn them off, but you have absolutely no guarantee that they won't leak. We are a country that has many geological faults. Most of the time, the industry doesn't seem to know exactly where these faults are. And this is an incredibly dangerous place to put this technology in, because the moment this slippery water gets into those faults, who knows what happens?
Corin, you've been trying to get in for a few minutes.
I just want to come back on the previous points actually first. Just to reiterate, it's really not an either-or. I mean, there is a really exciting tidal project being planned in Swansea Bay, which I think is, a really good first of a kind for quite large-scale tidal power. But even if you take the current targets to get renewable energy up to around 15% of total energy by 2020. That's great. That's still only 15%. And if you have nuclear as 10%, roughly, you've still got 3/4 from hydrocarbons. So you've still got this huge, great thing to try and overcome. I think on the air quality, actually, it's really important to look at somewhere like Pennsylvania, for example, and the net effects of fracking and shale gas have been positive for air quality in Pennsylvania because they've led to the closure of coal-fired power stations, which, of course, are putting out far more in the way of nasty air pollutants than anything you would see, from shale gas development.
Alastair, we seem to have a problem in that there's this energy gap we're talking about. Has there just been, on the part of successive governments, a failure to plan for the future properly in energy policy?
I think there's been a bizarre combination of overcomplication and ignorance. You look at the energy bill going through right now, some parts of it are hugely complex. They've had everyone and his wife weighed in. I've weighed it in, I'm sure Corin's weighed it in. And they've adjusted and tweaked and twonked, and some bits are just sprawling. Other bits we have no real idea what it's going to do. There's a bit on energy efficiency added at the 11th hour, which is absolutely vital. Why wasn't it there at the start, and why don't we really know what it's going to be? But I did want to get to another point about the cost of renewables and how we bring those down, because I think that what we've seen is the cost of solar panels, the cost of turbines, absolutely collapse over the last 10 years.
But Corin's point that he's just made there is that 75% of our energy comes from sources that are not renewables or nuclear. How do we fill that gap?
That's what we've planned to do. That's what is intended.
But in the short term, that's a long-term plan, isn't it, to fill the gap with renewables?
Gas is the long-term plan. Right now, we're planning huge deployment of offshore, onshore wind, huge work on energy efficiency. We need to fix what are the barriers to making sure these work. And the last thing we need is the Prime Minister, the same week that he was celebrating fracking and saying we just need to stomach it and think of the national good, saying that he didn't see much role for onshore wind or solar power anymore in the UK. That's the thing that makes this really problematic. That's what makes it really black and white when it shouldn't be, is when the Prime Minister picks sides for, I'm going against the public and actually against where the investment's headed for shale gas, but I'll do the reverse for renewables, for new renewable technology. That will cause a big problem. If we dissuade people from investing into renewables in the UK, as they've planned to do over the next 3 years, that's when we're going to start facing trouble, because people need to start from scratch again, and that's a big delay.
Corin, the Chancellor has said they're going to give the biggest tax breaks in the world to people who want to frack in this country. If it's such a profitable technology, why the need for this permissive regime?
Well, actually, it's often been misleadingly characterised as a sort of subsidy to the shale gas industry, and that's absolutely not what it is. It's a rate of tax, very similar actually to the small field allowance, which is in use offshore, a rate of tax that companies will pay of between 30 and 62%. So they'll start off paying the 30% rate of corporation tax, and the allowance then will allow them to offset the 32% rate of supplementary charge. As that allowance fades away, then the tax rate will go up towards 62%. So it's still quite a large rate of tax. I mean, just on the subsidy point, I believe that renewable technologies pay the normal 20% rate of corporation tax, and of course then have a subsidy in terms of the electricity price. So shale gas is absolutely not being subsidised here and could potentially generate quite a lot of tax revenue for the government.
Charles, we've got subsidies being paid for renewables that won't be the case for fracking gas.
Can I just note on that last point of Corin's that the day after George Osborne stood up and said he wanted to be the most generous tax regime in the world for frackers, there was a comment from Peter Lilly, long-time Conservative MP, himself, I think the deputy chairman of an oil and gas company, was operating somewhere in as it might be Kazakhstan, who has been a long-time supporter of the fossil fuel industry, fair enough, he stood up and said, I don't quite understand why the Chancellor is offering tax breaks to the oil and gas frackers. Now, that was from a friend of the industry, someone who's involved in the industry, and I have to say I utterly and completely agree with him. As far as Pennsylvania improving their atmosphere by shutting down coal-fired power stations, of course, that is a very good thing. But I would draw Corin's attention to something called the Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Water and Air, and they have something called the List of the Harmed. And on that list, there are over 1,500 incidents of families, household, communities that have been harmed by things to do with fracking. Now, I'm sorry, it's a statistic which is there. It is not a safe technology. If you can get fossil fuels by conventional means, fine. That is not posing the kind of dangers that fracking poses. But yes, we need it as a bridging fuel until a world when we're all leading a cleaner, greener, more renewable life. But Corin has already said it's not going to come on stream for another 10 years. It's not going to solve our problems for 10 years. Let's spend those 10 years really investing in research into the way that it has to be in the future, which is renewable.
Let's do both. I think that's the difference, that we can't just do the one and not the other. We actually do need to do both. I mean, the point about the existing power crunch in 2015 is sort of slightly separate, because that's about power generating capacity rather than actual, the fuels that go into that. But I would just again say that, just when it comes to electricity, we basically have at the moment, about 4 baseload options, really. Coal, we don't want to do that. Biomass, and there's a limit there, particularly given the land use problems of using large forests, even if you're also using them for paper and using the waste products for energy. And then you've got gas and nuclear, and those are the only 4 baseload ones we've got. So I think a key element to that research into renewables is going to be about storage. So making sure that we can turn intermittent renewables into more reliable sources of energy through large-scale storage.
I'm afraid we're running out of time here. Perhaps if I can just ask one final question. Do we all accept that there might be a need for gas produced by fracking, at least in the short term, or at least to cover the energy gap? Is there a sort of consensus on that? Corin, I know you've basically said that we do need to have it until renewables come on stream. Alastair, do you think that's true?
I think we are all agreed that there's a role for gas in the short term. Not necessarily fracking. I think there's a lot of questions about what gas and how much you lock yourself into a long-term gas future that isn't sustainable.
And Charles, do you agree that there is a need for gas until renewables come on stream in a large way?
Yes, but I absolutely agree with Alastair's qualification there. I think fracking is too dangerous. It's done too much damage elsewhere in the world. Why should we want to visit it on the UK?
Well, we'll have to leave it there. I'd like to thank my guests, Corin Taylor of the Institute of Directors, Alastair Harper of the Green Alliance, and Charles Metcalfe, a resident of Balcombe. Thank you very much indeed for coming along.